It started on a rainy Thursday in March, the day I moved back home. Not home in the cozy, childhood sense. Home had been splintered long ago, around the time Dad left and my mom remarried. This new place, cabin style with creaky steps and pine needles that tracked inside no matter how often you swept, belonged more to Nate than to any memory I could claim. He married my mother when I was 14. By the time I turned 22, she was gone. One of those quiet disappearances life calls peaceful, though the grief felt anything but. Nate didn't try to fill the void. He didn't smother or retreat. He just existed beside the ache, solid and unspeaking, like a lighthouse someone had built a mile too far from shore. I came back because grad school was done and jobs were few. Because the house was too big for him. Because even in my mother's absence, Nate felt like gravity. He was 45. Quiet in a way that made you lean closer. Former Marine, now a trucker with hands that could fold steel but always handled mugs like porcelain. He wore the same brown leather jacket, no matter the weather. And when he smiled, which wasn't often, it felt like breaking open a lock you'd long stopped trying to pick. "You sure about this?" he asked the day I arrived, 1 box of books and a duffel bag of clothes, all I had to my name. I nodded. "It's temporary. Until I find something." His eyes studied me, just a beat too long. "You know you can stay as long as you need, Ava." Ava. Not honey. Not kiddo. He never used terms that softened the edges. That night, I unpacked in the guest room, formerly my mom's sewing space, the scent of lavender still clinging to the curtains. I expected the silence to press down on me, but it didn't. Nate cooked pasta. We ate in companionable quiet. He asked about my thesis. I told him about the professor who thought existential literature was an excuse for passive aggression. He laughed, a sound so unexpected it made me smile even as I chewed. "You ever think about taking the rig out?" he asked. "What? Like on a trip? Like learning the ropes? Being out there for real?" I blinked. "You'd let me?" He shrugged. "You're curious. And I trust you." That trust curled inside me like heat. We left the next morning. I didn't know what I expected, the clatter of chains, the stench of gas stations, some hard-bitten version of the American myth. But the cab of Nate's truck was clean, orderly, with a hanging air freshener shaped like a pine tree and a soft plaid blanket folded neatly behind the seat. He drove like he thought about every turn 3 seconds before it happened. When he reached for the gear shift, I watched his forearm flex beneath rolled-up sleeves. His fingers calloused but careful. I was too aware. Of the way he listened to Springsteen and hummed low under his breath. Of how he handed me a warm thermos before I even asked for coffee. Of how he glanced over, occasionally, like he was making sure I was still breathing. "This is wild," I said, watching the fog roll across the Wyoming plains. "You get used to it," he replied. "I don't want to get used to it." I murmured, and I meant it. We stopped at a rest area near dusk. Nate stretched, the hem of his shirt lifting just enough to expose a scar along his hip, white and smooth like lightning caught in skin. "What's that from?" I asked, then instantly regretted it. "Training accident," he said. "Long time ago." There was more he didn't say. There always was. That night, we slept in the cab's sleeper berth, Nate on one side, me on the other, a thin line of air between us that felt oddly electric. I couldn't sleep, not because of the engine hum or the distant thunder, but because of the strange comfort I felt lying within reach of him. Not touching, just present. When I turned over and whispered, "Nate?" he answered without hesitation. "Yeah, thanks for letting me come." He didn't reply, not right away. Then softly, "You belong." I pressed my cheek to the pillow and closed my eyes. That was the first night I dreamed of him, not as a stepfather, not as some forbidden symbol, but as a man who noticed me, a man I couldn't unsee. 3 days on the road does strange things to time. Hours stretch, landscapes blur. The horizon becomes a constant promise, and the person beside you, the one holding the wheel, starts to feel like the only anchor in the world. By the fourth state line, I stopped counting signs and started memorizing Nate's hands instead. He had a habit of drumming his fingers against the steering wheel when he was thinking. He didn't hum, didn't whistle. Just tapped out quiet rhythms I began to recognize. When I asked what he was thinking about, he usually just said, fuel prices, routes, logistics. But once, just once, he said, you. The air between us stilled. He didn't elaborate. I didn't ask. We stopped in a town so small it had more dogs than people. Nate parked the rig near an old diner with vinyl booths and a jukebox stuck on 70s rock ballads. We ate pancakes at midnight, sharing a plate because the portions were too big, and he said he wasn't all that hungry. I watched him pour syrup with the kind of precision most men reserved for building things. You're not what I expected, I said suddenly. He glanced up. What did you expect? I don't know. More rules. Less kindness. Nate set the fork down. Kindness isn't weakness. Didn't say it was. I sipped my coffee. Just not used to it coming from people who scare me a little. His eyes searched mine. I scare you. Sometimes, I admitted. Not in a bad way. More like, you see through me. He didn't answer. Just looked at me in that quiet, steady way he did, like he was filing the truth away for later. When we left, the wind had picked up. It tugged my jacket, made me shiver. Without a word, Nate shrugged off his and draped it over my shoulders. I should have handed it back, said something teasing to break the moment. But I didn't. I wore it all the way to the next stop. And when we settled into the sleeper berth again, the scent of him wrapped around me. Leather, pine, something deeper. Something that made my chest ache. I turned toward the wall, willing myself not to think of his voice, his hands, the way he'd looked at me like he hadn't meant to let it show. But sleep didn't come easy. And when I woke from a dream I couldn't remember, breath caught in my throat, I realized he was awake too. Miles or nightmares? He asked, voice rough with sleep. Both, I said. He reached across the small space, brushing my hand with his. Just a touch. Just enough. And God help me, I didn't pull away. The next day, we drove in silence. Not the awkward kind. The charged kind. We didn't mention the hand touch. Didn't speak about the dreams, the jacket, or the way I'd looked at him like I wanted to memorize the slope of his jaw. But that night, somewhere in the orange dusk of New Mexico, I leaned my head on his shoulder. Just for a second. Just enough to say, I know this is wrong. But I'm still here. He didn't move. Didn't flinch. Only let out a long, slow breath. And I knew we were both crossing something. Not a line. Not yet. But something close. The border into Utah was marked by red rocks and a silence that had grown almost holy. It had been a week since I climbed into Nate's rig, and the space between us felt both tighter and more uncharted than ever. We didn't touch again, not really. But everything we said, and more often didn't say, felt like a brush against skin. Nate taught me to drive on the long, empty stretches, his voice low and measured as he talked me through the gears. I'd glance at him during turns, half praying he'd reach over again. Not to correct me, just to touch me, just to say I'm still here. He didn't. But he watched me. Not with judgment. With something heavier. Something real. At a truck stop outside Zion, we sat in plastic chairs under buzzing lights, eating greasy tacos with too much sour cream. I applied for 3 jobs last night, I said, licking sauce off my thumb. He raised an eyebrow. Yeah, I nodded. Just to say I'm trying. You don't have to prove anything to me. I looked up. I'm not sure who I'm trying to impress. He hesitated, then quietly. Maybe the wrong people. We both knew what he meant. That night, the sleeper felt smaller than usual. I couldn't stop fidgeting. Couldn't find a position that didn't brush against the memory of his shoulder beneath my head. The phantom warmth of his jacket still haunted my skin. Then came the moment. The storm rolled in fast, thunder growling like an engine on fire, rain hammering the roof. I gasped when lightning cracked too close, too loud. Nate turned. You okay? I didn't answer. I sat up, trembling in the dark. Do you ever get scared? His eyes, shadowed but sure, held mine. Only when I can't protect someone. I swallowed hard. Even if they're not yours to protect?
His jaw tightened.
But his voice didn't waver. Even then, something inside me broke wide open. I crossed the space before I could think. Slid beside him. My fingers found his arm. His breath caught. "Nate," I whispered. But I didn't finish the sentence.
Because he pulled me to him.
Not roughly. Not possessively. Just completely. His arms around me were warm and strong, and full of something terrifyingly honest. I pressed my forehead to his chest, and he let out a breath like he'd been holding it for days. "I can't do this," he said, almost to himself. "I know. We didn't kiss. We didn't cross the line. But God, we hovered at the edge, hands gripping the railing, hearts howling beneath our ribs." He held me until the storm passed. And when I slipped back to my side, he reached for my hand beneath the blanket. We fell asleep like that. Fingers laced. Like a secret. Like a promise we didn't have the courage to name. We crossed into Oregon on a golden morning, the sky wide and forgiving. I sat behind the wheel while Nate dozed in the passenger seat, his head turned toward the window, one arm resting across his chest. I stole glances at him between curves in the highway, at the stubble that softened his jaw, at the way his hand twitched slightly, like he was dreaming of shifting gears. I should have looked away, but I didn't want to. We'd been on the road for 12 days. The tension between us had settled into something familiar, like music playing in another room. Not loud, but always there. That night, we stopped at a clearing near the coast. Pine trees framed the sky, and the sea hummed just beyond the cliffs. Nate built a small fire from the emergency bundle he kept in the rig. I brought out 2 mugs of gas station cocoa, too sweet and too hot. We sat on a log side by side, our knees brushing. "You've been quiet," he said. "So have you." "I've been thinking." I stared at the flames. "Me too." He turned toward me. "This thing between us." I didn't move. I couldn't. "I never meant for it to happen," he said. "I know. But I'm not sorry it did." I looked at him, then really looked. "I'm not either." The wind tugged at my hair. I didn't push it away. Nate reached out, brushing a strand from my cheek. His fingers paused there, just briefly before falling back. I leaned in. Just a little.
And he met me halfway.
The kiss was soft, careful, full of every word we hadn't said. It didn't ask for more. It didn't demand. But it stayed. When we pulled apart, the fire had burned low. I rested my head against his shoulder, and he let out a breath I felt in my bones. Later, in the cab, we didn't sleep. We lay side by side, our hands entwined, our eyes open in the dark. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Of what?" "That the road ends. That we go back to the real world, and this, whatever this is, gets left behind." Nate turned toward me. "Ava, nothing about you belongs behind."
He paused.
"I don't want to pretend this didn't happen." "Me neither." "So, where do we go?" I asked, my voice trembling. He touched my cheek. "Wherever you want." And in the quiet that followed, I realized this wasn't about labels or timelines or right and wrong. It was about truth. And I had never felt more seen, more chosen, more free. I passed my CDL 2 months later. Nate was waiting outside the testing site, leaning against the hood of the truck, arms crossed, smile crooked. "Your turn to drive," he said.
And it was.
We hit the road together, partners, co-pilots, something more. We never told anyone. Not in words. But sometimes, when we parked the rig beneath a sky full of stars, and he reached for my hand across the console, I knew. Love doesn't need permission. It just needs a place to land. And I had found mine. In a rig. On the road. With him.